Beneath the golden glow of the Aegean sun, the city of Troy stood as a beacon of power and grandeur. Its towering walls, built by the hands of gods and mortals alike, seemed unbreakable, a testament to the might of its people. For years, merchants and travelers spoke of its wealth, its wisdom, and the unmatched beauty of its prince's wife, Helen. But as history has often shown, beauty and power are dangerous gifts. Far across the sea, in the mighty kingdom of Mycenae, the air was thick with tension. King Agamemnon, ruler of the Achaeans, paced within his grand hall, his eyes burning with determination. The insult suffered by his brother Menelaus, the loss of his wife Helen to the Trojan prince Paris, was a wound that could not be ignored. Around him stood the greatest warriors of Greece: Odysseus, the cunning mind of Ithaca; Achilles, the fierce and nearly unstoppable warrior of Thea; Ajax, the towering giant of Salamis. Each had answered the call to arms, bound by loyalty, ambition, or the pursuit of glory. Their fleets were prepared, their warriors eager. The time for words had passed. The time for conquest had arrived. With the blessing of the gods, or perhaps their curse, the great Achaean fleet set sail. Hundreds of ships, their sails billowing in the wind, cut through the waters toward Troy. It was a sight never before seen, a force so vast that even the bravest of men could not help but feel a chill in their bones. But Troy was not unprepared. King Priam, wise and experienced, had seen war before. His sons, Hector and Paris, stood by his side. Hector, the warrior prince, was the heart of Troy's defense, beloved by his people, feared by his enemies. Paris, though more lover than fighter, was the cause of the war, and he knew that his choices had set fate into motion. As the first ships reached the shores of Troy, the defenders gathered on the mighty walls, watching as the Achaean warriors disembarked. The winds carried the distant echoes of clashing swords and battle cries yet to come. The storm had arrived, and with it, the greatest war the world had ever known. The sun hung low in the sky as the first waves of Achaean warriors stormed the beaches of Troy. The sound of shields clashing and war cries filling the air marked the beginning of a battle that would rage for years. Leading the charge was Achilles, his golden armor gleaming like a flame against the tide of war. With each strike, he cut through the Trojan ranks, his spear finding its mark again and again. Beside him, Ajax, a towering force of nature, swung his mighty shield and sword, pushing back the defenders with sheer strength. Yet Troy did not stand defenseless. Hector, prince of the city and its greatest warrior, rallied his soldiers. With unwavering courage, he met the Achaeans head-on, his sword striking true, his shield turning aside blow after blow. Unlike his younger brother Paris, Hector did not fight for personal glory. He fought for his people, his family, and the city he called home. Day after day, the battle raged. The walls of Troy stood firm, an impenetrable fortress that denied the Achaeans their victory. No siege engine, no storming force could breach its defenses. What the Achaeans had hoped would be a swift conquest soon turned into a bitter war of attrition. Months passed, then years. The once mighty warriors of Greece grew weary, their patience thinning. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and discord spread among the ranks. Agamemnon and Achilles clashed, their tempers threatening to fracture the great alliance. Even the gods, who had watched over the war with great interest, began taking sides, some favoring Troy, others aiding the Achaeans. It became clear that brute strength alone would not win this war. If Troy was to fall, it would not be by force, but by cunning. And so, the seeds of deception were sown. The war dragged on, year after year, as the Achaeans struggled to breach the mighty walls of Troy. The once great warriors of Greece, who had arrived filled with fire and purpose, now fought battles as much against their own exhaustion as against the Trojans. But among them, one warrior burned brighter than all the rest: Achilles, the son of the sea goddess Thetis and the mortal king Peleus. He was swift as the wind, fierce as a storm, and feared by all who faced him. No warrior, Trojan or Achaean could match his skill. Yet even Achilles, mighty as he was still a man, and men are ruled by pride. His fury was not only reserved for the Trojans. A bitter feud with King Agamemnon had driven him to withdraw from battle, leaving the Achaeans without their greatest champion. Achilles felt betrayed, dishonored, and in his absence the Trojans gained the upper hand. With Achilles refusing to fight, Hector and his warriors pushed the Achaeans back to their ships, setting their very sails ablaze. The once mighty invasion force teetered on the brink of ruin. Seeing their destruction near, Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, could not stand idly by. Donning the armor of Achilles, he led a desperate charge against the Trojans, rallying the Achaeans once more. For a moment, the tide of battle turned. The Trojans, believing Achilles himself had returned, wavered. But Hector, ever the fearless defender of his city, stood firm. In a fateful duel, he struck Patroclus down, unaware that he had slain not Achilles, but his dearest companion. Word of Patroclus's fall reached Achilles, and with it, a rage unlike any the world had ever known. He emerged from his tent, his grief twisting into fury. The time for pride was over, the time for vengeance had come. With renewed purpose, Achilles returned to battle, his wrath as unrelenting as the waves of the sea. The Trojans, who once held their ground so fiercely, now trembled before him. No warrior could stand against him. No shield could turn aside his spear. And at the heart of his rage stood Hector, the pride of Troy. Their fates were intertwined, and soon they would meet upon the battlefield. The battlefield fell silent as Achilles strode forward, his golden armor glinting beneath the fading sun. His rage had turned him into something more than a man, a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. Across the field, Hector stood atop the walls of Troy, gazing at the destruction Achilles had already wrought. The prince knew that his fate was sealed. With a heavy heart, Hector turned to his father, King Priam, and his beloved wife, Andromache. "Do not weep for me," he said softly. "If I am to fall, let it be with honor, defending my home." As Hector stepped beyond the gates, the warriors of Troy held their breath. The Achaeans too fell still. They all knew what was to come. Achilles advanced, his spear poised. "You took from me what I held dearest," he growled. "Now, you will answer for it." Hector met his gaze without fear. "I did what any warrior would do. But if this is to be my end, let it be a battle worthy of song." And so they clashed. The two greatest warriors of their age fought with a skill and fury unmatched by any before them. Hector was swift, striking with precision and power. Achilles was relentless, his every movement fueled by vengeance. The earth trembled beneath their feet as their blades met, the echoes of their battle reaching the heavens. For a time they seemed evenly matched, but Hector was a man defending his home, while Achilles was a warrior consumed by rage. And rage, when unchained, knows no equal. With a final, fateful strike, Achilles' spear found its mark, piercing Hector's armor and striking his heart. The Prince of Troy staggered, his strength fading. As he fell, he looked to the sky, whispering a final prayer for his city, his family, and his people. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Achilles stood over his fallen foe, his wrath not yet satisfied. He took Hector's body and, before the horrified eyes of the Trojans, dragged it behind his chariot, circling the battlefield in a display of unrelenting fury. That night, as Troy mourned its fallen son, King Priam, an old man now broken by grief, did what no one expected. He walked alone into the enemy's camp, unarmed, unguarded, and knelt before Achilles himself. "I come not as a king," Priam said, his voice trembling, "but as a father. Return my son to me." In that moment, something within Achilles shifted. The rage that had consumed him for so long began to ebb, replaced by something he had forgotten: compassion. He looked at Priam, a man who had lost everything, and saw in him his own father, waiting for a son who would never return. With solemn hands, Achilles released Hector's body, allowing Troy to grieve and honor its greatest hero. But though the war paused for a moment, it was far from over. The gods had already woven their final thread, and Troy's fate was sealed. The war dragged on year after year as both sides suffered terrible losses. Troy still stood, its walls unbroken, its people weary but defiant. The Achaeans, despite their victories on the battlefield, could not breach the city's defenses. Frustration spread through the Greek camp. Many warriors longed for home, and even the great king Agamemnon wondered if Troy would ever fall. But among them was one man whose mind worked not with brute force but with cunning: Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. He had fought alongside the greatest warriors of Greece, but he knew that Troy could not be conquered by strength alone. One evening, as the fires burned low in the Achaean camp, Odysseus spoke. "We have fought for years, and still these walls do not fall, but what if we do not break them? What if we are welcomed inside?" The war-weary kings and generals turned to him, intrigued. It was then that Odysseus revealed his plan. They would build a great wooden horse, so large, so magnificent, that the Trojans would see it as an offering, a tribute to their unbreakable city. But within the hollow beast, Achaea's finest warriors would hide, waiting for the moment to strike. The plan was bold, it was dangerous, but it was their last chance. And so, beneath the cover of night, the Achaeans set to work. They felled great trees from the shores of Troy, shaping them into a towering wooden horse. The craftsmanship was exquisite, its beauty undeniable. As dawn approached, the final details were carved, and inside, a chosen few, including Odysseus himself, slipped into the darkness of its hollow chamber. The rest of the Achaean army, following the plan, burned their tents, boarded their ships, and sailed away, vanishing beyond the horizon. Only the horse remained, standing alone on the empty beach. At sunrise, the Trojans emerged from their city, wary and confused. Had the Achaeans truly given up? Had they finally admitted defeat? And there, waiting for them, was the great wooden horse. A gift? A trophy? A sign from the gods? The people of Troy gathered, debating its meaning. Some, like the wise priest Laocoon, warned against it. "Beware the gifts of your enemies," he cried. "There is deceit in this offering." But others, weary of war and eager for celebration, saw it as a sign of victory. And among them was Paris, the very man whose love had started the war. "The Achaeans have fled," he declared. "Let us claim what is ours." With great effort, they pulled the horse through the gates of Troy. The city erupted in celebration, the streets filled with laughter, wine, and song. After a decade of war, the people of Troy finally believed they had won. But as night fell and the last torches burned low, the trap was set. Inside the wooden horse, hidden in the darkness, Odysseus and his warriors waited, silent, ready. Troy had opened its gates to its own destruction. The city of Troy slept. After years of war, its people had finally allowed themselves a night of peace. The streets, once filled with weary soldiers, now echoed with laughter and music. The great wooden horse stood tall in the central square, a monument to what they believed was their victory. But within its hollow belly, the true battle had already begun. Odysseus and his warriors, cramped within the wooden beast, waited in tense silence. Hours passed, the muffled sounds of celebration fading into the quiet of night. When the last torch in the streets flickered out, Odysseus gave the signal. Carefully, a hidden panel in the horse's side was pushed open. One by one, the Achaean warriors climbed out, their footsteps as light as shadows. They descended into the sleeping city, blades drawn, their hearts pounding with the weight of what was to come. At the same time, far beyond the horizon, a dark fleet returned. The Achaean army had not sailed home. They had merely hidden beyond sight, waiting for this moment. Silent as ghosts, their ships touched the shore once more. Soldiers disembarked, moving swiftly toward the open gates of Troy, left unguarded in the foolish joy of victory. Then the horror began. The signal was given, a single torch lifted high into the night. From the walls of Troy, flames erupted as the Achaeans inside the city struck. The gates, once Troy's greatest defense, were flung open. Warriors poured in like a flood, their swords gleaming in the moonlight. The Trojans awoke to chaos. Smoke filled the streets. Shouts of alarm rang out as warriors fought to defend their home. But it was too late. The enemy was already within. Paris fought bravely, his arrows striking down Achaean warriors from the rooftops. But fate was against him. The gods had already turned their eyes away. He fell before the dawn. King Priam, aged and weary, sought refuge in the temple of Zeus. But there he too met his end, the last king of a once mighty city. And amidst the ruin, the women and children of Troy huddled together, watching as their home, their lives, and their history burned around them. The city that had once stood so proud, its walls unbroken for a decade, now lay in flames. Troy, the jewel of the Aegean, was falling, and by morning it would be no more. Troy burned. The Golden City, once a beacon of power and prosperity, was now a ruin of smoke and ash. Flames licked the sky, casting eerie shadows over the streets as the last cries of its people echoed through the night. The Achaeans had no mercy. Their long years of frustration, hardship, and loss had hardened their hearts. The city that had resisted them for a decade was now at their feet, and they would leave nothing behind but ruin. Amidst the destruction, Queen Hecuba, once the proud mother of princes, wandered through the wreckage searching for the last remnants of her family. She found her daughters huddled in the broken halls of the palace, their faces streaked with soot and tears. The mighty King Priam, her husband, was gone. Her son Hector had fallen long before, and Paris, the man whose love had doomed them all, lay lifeless in the streets. The great warriors of Greece claimed their prizes. Some took treasures of gold and silver, others claimed the remaining noblewomen of Troy as captives, their fates now tied to the victors. The proud Queen Hecuba and her daughters were led away in chains, their kingdom reduced to dust. But one final act of cruelty remained. At the heart of Troy's destruction stood a boy, Astyanax, the young son of Hector, the last heir of the royal line, a symbol of Troy's legacy. The Achaeans, fearing that one day he would rise to rebuild his father's city, made a terrible decision. With cold determination, they cast him from the walls of Troy, ensuring that the city's royal bloodline would end forever. As dawn broke, the fire still smoldered, but Troy was no more. The Achaeans, their mission finally complete, prepared to return home. Some, like Agamemnon, believed they had secured their place in history. Others, like Odysseus, felt the weight of what they had done pressing heavily upon them. The gods watched in silence. Some had aided in Troy's downfall, while others had wept for its people. But in the end, fate had been fulfilled. Troy, the mighty, the proud, the unbreakable, had fallen. Yet even in its ashes, its story would live on. The war was over. The Achaeans had won. But victory came at a cost, and the gods were not yet finished with those who had taken part in Troy's destruction. As the Greek warriors set sail for home, the sea itself seemed to mourn the fallen city. The once calm waters turned restless, stirred by unseen hands. Many ships were lost to storms, swallowed by the deep, before their crews could ever see their homeland again. For King Agamemnon, the triumph he had long sought became his undoing. Upon returning to Mycenae, he found not celebration, but betrayal. His own wife, Clytemnestra, had not forgiven him for the sacrifices he had made for this war. And so, on the very night of his return, she ended his life, sealing the curse that plagued his family. Menelaus, the wronged husband, reclaimed Helen from the ruins of Troy. But was it victory? The woman who had launched 1,000 ships had seen the horrors of war, and though she returned to Sparta with Menelaus, she was forever changed. Odysseus, the cunning mind behind Troy's downfall, faced his own trials. Though he had outwitted kings and warriors, he could not outwit fate. The gods cast him into a journey of hardship and wandering, a 10-year struggle across stormy seas and cursed lands before he would finally see his home again. And what of Troy? Though its people were scattered, its walls turned to ash, its legacy would not die. Aeneas, a Trojan prince who had escaped the city's destruction, carried its memory across the seas. He wandered far, guided by the will of the gods, until he reached distant shores. From his bloodline, it was said, a new empire would rise. Rome, a city destined to shape the world. Thus, Troy was not truly lost. It lived on in legend, in song, in the hearts of those who remembered. The war had ended, but its echoes would never fade. For as long as men told stories, the name of Troy would be spoken. The city that stood against the might of Greece. The city that defied fate. The city that, though fallen, would never be forgotten. And so, the tale of Troy lives on, forever woven into the fabric of history.